it was not a very long conversation that Charles and I had one evening sitting in front of the fire, and we were talking about him dying. And like in the next breath, he picked up a seed catalog and was choosing seeds for the garden for that summer. And I remember thinking, I'm not sure you're going to be here to see that. It didn't matter. We were picking seeds together for our garden. And it was just this overwhelm to me of like, how beautiful that we're talking about his dying and picking seeds in the same conversation. And without, I don't want to say without any stress, but almost without any stress, because he had created this container of allowing the conversation to happen.
Hey, I'm Tanya Wilkinson, and this is Death on the Daily, bringing the conversation about death out of the shadows and into the mainstream. Because along with birth and change, if there's one thing that's going to happen to us all, then death is it. And we're going to explore how death actually shows up for us on the daily in a multitude of ways, and how when we allow ourselves to accept and to be with death, how it can teach us a whole heap about how to live this life well. What if you could face death whenever it comes, because it's an eventuality, knowing that nothing has been left unsaid, both in making sure that those who you love know just how much they mean to you, and in giving them the gift of knowing exactly what your end of life wishes are. Might sound like a strange gift, but actually it's one of the greatest gifts that we can leave. My guest today's husband did exactly this in the last chapter of his life. Dr. Martha Calihan has been a physician for over 30 years. She's also the author of A Death Lived, a profound memoir of her husband Charles's final illness. Martha shares her powerful story of love, courage, and the gift of saying it all thanks to the powerful teachings and container for conversations about dying that her husband Charles created. So Martha, welcome to Death on the Daily.
Thank you, Tanya. I'm very honored to be here with you today.
Oh, I'm so excited for our conversation. I am literally having my second read of your book as we speak. And I really want to dive straight into your and to Charles's story, because you speak about Charles as your teacher. And I think we've got so much that we can all learn through you both. So I just want to open up the space for you to share anything that you wish to around your and Charles's journey.
I think how I like to think about the journey and really why I chose to tell this story is because, to be honest, I loved him enough to be willing to help him die. You know, that may sound a little crazy at first blush, but it's the truth, right? And as you and I were talking earlier, I met Charles when I was 16 years old. He actually was a teacher of mine in high school. Years later, we re-met. There was no early relationship. We re-met, married. We had a fabulous marriage. We share a son. I have two older stepsons. But in his dying process and in his long, prolonged illness, it became very clear to both of us that what Charles was supposed to do, among other things, was to teach all of us who were present and available to listen and to learn how to die well. And I would say he did it beautifully. It was a gift that I will carry with me through all my days.
I love that, the perspective of him teaching you about what it is to die and to die well, and the fact that you also so rooted in your love, and that really comes through in your writing. And you speak in your writing as well about how you had to wear these two hats. There was the one of you as a physician, and obviously with all of that medical knowledge, understanding your status within the hospital as well. And then on the other side, there was you as a wife and as a mother. So tell us a little bit about how you navigated that journey through Charles's final illness.
I mean, it was a big struggle for me personally. And Charles had illnesses over many years. So it was not just a one and done. So I had struggled with that over the years. And it is hard because you're both, right? And ultimately, I ended up working with a fabulous therapist here, very wonderful man who really helped me, I suppose, integrate those two parts of myself. I was busy trying to keep them separate. And, I was either a physician with medical knowledge or I was the wife of an ill and then dying man. And the truth is that I'm both. They're woven together in me, and I needed not uh, worry about trying to separate them and keep them separate. They're both part of me, and yes, it made it hard, but it also was yet another piece of my learning and my growth on the journey, I think, to figure that out.
Beautiful, that integration between them both. And as you shared, it wasn't a quick, that sort of one illness and then that's it. And could you share a little bit around Charles's journey with illness? Let's root into that and how that was for you, because actually I think that there's a perspective, again, that the perspective of death, because it's been pushed behind closed doors, is very much that of just one day, that's it. Well, that was definitely my perspective of death before I started really connecting into what it is and connecting into the journey of those who I loved, for example, my grandparents. But yeah, I'd love for you to just share a little bit around Charles's journey with his illnesses.
Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds trite, right? But it is the only thing certain in each of our lives is death, right? And how that happens, we don't know. And for some, it's a completely sudden, like you said, one, you're here, you're gone, sort of. I think for most people, it's more of a gradual process, more of a gradual decline. And for Charles, he had cardiovascular disease, so there was a lot of illness over the years, and a lot of recovery. The last year of his life, however, we had six admissions to intensive care, and each one was fraught with complications and drama. And each time, I mean, he got through the event, right, and recovered, but each time it was like a degradation of his being, what he was able to do, how he never came back to the level where he was before that happened. So it was a progressive sort of ratcheting down, and a sense that we both had of where it was headed, but you don't really think that at the time.
Mm.
And looking back on it, like my very dear friend, our hospice doctor, I mean, the first time we met with him, and we were probably 6 months into the final year, and I remember Charles and I had a conversation of like, what do we do? I mean, this isn't going really well. But you're kind of in this limbo, right? You're out of the hospital, you're home, you're better, you're not well. It's already happened 3 times. How many more? And sort of the unspoken, like, when's this going to be done, right? When's the event going to happen that you can't recover from? And we talked about maybe we should talk to Tom, my friend. So I called him, and it took us a couple of days to, get back in touch with each other. And I remember telling Tom, and we do this as physicians, like, let me tell you about a case and, get some advice. So I presented the case as if it was an anonymous person. I'm not quite sure why I did that, probably because I didn't want to hear. And I said, when, Tom, do you think it would be the right time for a palliative care or hospice consult? And he said, now. And I remember just my whole being sort of having that visceral stomach reaction of like, oh. And then I told him that I was talking about Charles, and he said, well, I knew that.
Mm.
It's a small community. He knew. And then he came and met with us, and it was just this beautiful, hard, painful, magnificent experience of the three of us sitting at the dining room table having this conversation about where this was likely to end up, what the options were. Tom had all the paperwork for palliative care and hospice. Charles didn't want to sign them. He wasn't ready. But we had the conversation. And there was zero pressure from Tom. It's just like, these are facts. These are papers you can sign. This is what this means. This is what not signing them means. This is, and he knew where this was headed, but he wasn't like setting it in stone for us. He was offering options and a perspective, and sort of, it started to allow deeper conversation between us, Charles and me, about where this was headed and the likelihood of dying. And it was sort of this beautiful container that was created of possibility in the diminution of his life, which is kind of a both and again, right?
Yeah, I think it's so profound what you're sharing, because I still think there's such an under awareness of palliative care, and the fact that actually it isn't just, for example, my perspective before was palliative care is what came in at the end of my granddad's life. Not that, to your point, there are conversations, it's about equipping yourself with an understanding of what the choices are, but actually then you can have that autonomy to say, now's not the time, or now is the time. And what, obviously for you as a physician and with your network and everything, and having Tom in your network, you had a really strong understanding of palliative care. But was there anything that surprised you in experiencing it as a wife and going on that journey with Charles? About, you mentioned around that, how empowering it was. Was there anything that surprised you in that journey with palliative care?
I don't think anything that really surprised me in our journey with it. It's just, and now I'm talking as both wife and physician, it breaks my heart that more people don't take advantage of it. Right. And it goes back to, we are such an incredibly death phobic culture. Nobody wants to admit that this is where things are heading, or, and it's, I mean, I've seen it so many times in the hospital as a physician that people just, blinders on, head in the sand, and it's okay. I mean, obviously we can't be judgmental about people's choices, but I wish that they would allow the conversations so that the choices could be made. I don't think you can make a good informed decision without having the information. Nobody's going to present the information or tell you, we're almost out of options here. We can keep going. It's not likely to be successful. Here are other options, and let somebody decide. And, I think, and I was trying to remember if this was explicit or implicit in training, but that if you were too direct with somebody, you could take away their hope. And I don't think that hope and truth are mutually exclusive. I mean, Charles said that almost up to the end. We know I'm dying. I hope it's not soon.
Yeah.
You can hold both. You absolutely can. And I wish that as a culture, palliative care and hospice were more readily accessed. I mean, it's improving, but still the statistics are that hospice usually is called in when there's 3 to 5 days left. And that's, I don't want to say it's a waste, but it's almost a waste of everybody's time and resources. Because if that team is in place ahead of time, they can be tremendous support to the person who's dying, the family. And, if you're in the last 2 or 3 days of life, that's a challenging time to meet a whole new team of people, right?
Yeah.
So I think we just miss the opportunity and the richness of what can be brought in a hospice and palliative care environment. And people, don't have a good, clear notion of what palliative care can offer. It's really symptom relief and making decisions about whether you want to do that at home or wherever you are versus in the hospital. It doesn't mean that people are not going to treat your illness anymore or your symptoms.
That's a big misconception, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Exactly that. It's almost, I feel like in our society, and again, as you shared, culturally, there is that fight to the end. I think is such a, if I think about medical dramas on TV and just how it's portrayed through everything,
right,
versus the nuanced conversations that do feel so crucial. And what came through for me as well, just as I was reflecting on what you were saying and then connecting into your and Charles's journey, is how it does take those multiple conversations. And obviously there was that pre-existing relationship with Tom, but to your point of having someone completely new coming in late, whereas there is the opportunity of building that relationship, but also from that mindset perspective, there's a lot of barriers that we need to break through in these conversations when death is so avoided throughout the whole of our life, and experiences with others dying are pushed behind closed doors. So as well, there's that of those mindset blocks where I suppose if someone, and love to hear your perspectives on this, but if I'm thinking about it, I could imagine that there could be someone who's really death avoidant, understandably so, just given their culture, upbringing, etc. But to be able to give them that opportunity of taking those delicate steps out of their comfort zone to enter into those conversations. And I'm not sure that there's really the space that's created to be able to do that right now for a lot of people.
It's really hard. I mean, we don't support the conversations culturally, like you just said. And back to your comment about the TV dramas, I think what we have to remember is those are always like there's a crisis and a save, right? Because that's what makes good TV.
Yeah.
Well, it's a big event, and then everything that's brought to bear to save that person. And that's fabulous and exciting and the best of what modern Western medicine can bring to bear, right? And the situations are different at different stages of life and different sort of events. I mean, if you're in a car accident and somebody can save your life with all the intervention there is, and you're 30, fabulous. But if you are at the end of a terminal illness for which there is no cure, and death is going to be the outcome, then why not open up the space and have that conversation? I would be a big advocate of people, and I always say this, I mean, people do not everybody does a will, but at least people know that that's something that should be done. People tend to, have their life insurance policies and their financial stuff, and they'll talk about those things, right? Some people actually do like a yearly review of all that, like, are my documents in order? Why don't we include all the end of life documents just in that process and talk about it once a year at least? Because once the ice is broken, it's no longer the big elephant in the room, and then you can talk about it. You can let it go. You can come back to it. It's people need to know what they should have available in terms of medical decision making. And it's not just whether or not you have a do not resuscitate order, because that actually only applies if you are in a hospital setting. Nowhere else is it germane. There's not, resuscitation isn't in the cards in other settings. And there's lots of nuance to it. But people need to have a better understanding, I think, of what the possibilities are.
Yeah. I wholeheartedly agree with that. Yeah, I think that it does just need to be culturally embedded in, because actually, I mean, in my experience with our daughter, I knew I wanted to write her birth and death plan for her stillbirth in the hospital. And I knew that was terrifying to me. But it was really around facing into those fears. And actually, once I got started with it, and it's something that still sits with me when I'm taking my steps into my death admin. We always talk about life. I've got to do my life admin. And I'm sat here going, oh, yeah, still got to do so lots of my death admin. But I always remind myself of sitting there in the darkest week of my life and thinking, actually, putting pen to paper wasn't as scary as, I suppose, the gap before it. And I think that in our culture, because it's just not the norm, so people do get scared about it, or they get overwhelmed and they avoid. But what I think is so profound with that is how empowering it is, and that's what really has come through your book, is that actually, as you and Charles took those steps into those conversations, obviously for you as a physician, it's very different from you being like, yep, I know this has to happen, to you actually being sat there and having to have those conversations to put those things into practice. And I think the more of these stories that we can tell, the more that it shows actually we can do it. There are greater depths of which we can hold as humans. And I don't think that a lot of us have really understood that. Actually, death is a part of life. So therefore, going through that experience is an integrated part of us.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And what you're bringing to mind for me is a very particular it was not a very long conversation that Charles and I had one evening sitting in front of the fire. And we were talking about him dying. And like in the next breath, he picked up a seed catalog and was choosing seeds for the garden for that summer. And I remember thinking, I'm not sure you're going to be here to see that. It didn't matter. It didn't matter. We were picking seeds together for our garden. And it was just this overwhelm to me of like, how beautiful that we're talking about his dying and picking seeds in the same conversation. And without, I don't want to say without any stress, but almost without any stress, because he had created this container of allowing the conversation to happen. That was part of his teaching, right?
Yes.
I mean, that we could do both in that same, I don't know, maybe it was a minute, maybe it was 10 minutes. It doesn't matter how long it was. But it was magnificent. But I will always keep that image in my head of like, yeah, it is. It's just a part of life.
Yes. Beautiful, beautiful. And with it as part of life, I love that, creating the container to allow for that conversation to happen. And with that in mind, and with Charles as our teacher here, I'd love to get your thoughts as well. If anyone's tuning into this and perhaps whether it's navigating their own journey, perhaps at the end of life, or perhaps with any other challenges where it does take your mind to actually, I need to start planning for my end of life. Or if it's someone who's journeying with someone else, whether that's in a caregiving role or just someone who loves someone else, how could we open up that container to have these conversations, particularly in those spaces, in those families or groups where maybe these conversations just have never been spoken before and always pushed into the shadows?
Yeah, I think it's hard to crack it open. I know one thing that I have suggested to people, it's not uncommon right now that I'm talking with people who are maybe in their 60s, sort of in that sandwich generation, and they have elderly parents who maybe don't want to have the conversation. And one way that has been helpful is to, like if I were the adult child and you were the grandparent, I could say to you, I'm thinking about what I want to tell my kids about my dying plan. Can you help me think that through? That's a way to open the conversation that takes the pressure or the onus off of the 80-year-old a little bit. I've seen that be helpful. Like once the conversation is opened, but the spotlight's not on them, then it's like, oh, well, maybe you and I should talk about it too. So that's been helpful. Or just to, because I think if you sit down and say, how do you want to die? It's not going to go well,
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. It really is that you can go in as that embodiment. You made me think about, I know that you teach mindfulness, but you made me think about Thich Nhat Hanh when he was asked, how can I make everybody mindful? And his response was, be mindful, embody that. But I love that actually we can embody it ourselves. And that really, really resonates with me actually, because I definitely have parents who are pretty terrible about talking about all of this stuff. But you're right, actually, the spaces where there is that little, it's a very small lean in, is when it comes to me sharing about what I'm doing in this podcast or in stuff that I'm writing, etc.
Yeah. And then, yeah, and you don't have to have the full conversation in one fell swoop, right? You just open it up. And then maybe a week or two later, you go back to it. Or I do think a lot of it is once the ice has been broken, or once you've taken that first step, it's less scary to go back to it and to kind of add to it. And, it's not, and certainly for us, it was not a one and done. I mean, it was lots and lots and lots of conversations over time. But it was, that was part of the gift. I have a friend whose husband died basically getting off the treadmill. And she and I have had lots of, I'll say glasses, maybe bottles of wine, talking about which one was better. Which would you pick, right? Would you have his experience where he just dropped dead, or Charles's experience where it was a prolonged, both for the person and for us, the spouse, which it's kind of a funny conversation because we didn't get a choice. It just happened. But I'm so grateful for the time that we had and the ability to have the conversations. And, there's nothing left unsaid when Charles died.
That's beautiful. That's so beautiful. And also in that nothing left unsaid as well, what really shines through is how you brought your son, Connor, as well as your stepchildren into those conversations. You talk about your death talks. And again, that's something that for example, it really, really resonates with me because in my family, you talk about death. I had to remind my mum the other day when I was trying to speak to her about my nan and the fact that she's at the end of her life. And I was just asking, can I be told what the prognosis is and how long she's got? Because I want to make sure that I'm there and I'm in it and I'm upping the frequency that I go to see her. My mum immediately shut the conversation down on the grounds that I would be upset about it. And I thought, wow. And I did have to remind my mum, I was like, I went through the death of my daughter, I think, and I've got a podcast on this topic. I think I'll be all right to have this conversation. Yeah. But I think as parents, we can be so protective. But actually what really resonated with me is that's not the best way. And actually bringing our children into these conversations helps to also have them a part of it and to empower them. So I'd love to hear from you about those death talks that you had.
And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, my sense is that by having our son, Connor, be part of the entire experience, very much like myself, at the end of it, it's like there are no regrets, right? I mean, and as I've said to Connor privately and publicly, I mean, he gave his father and us the gift of time. I mean, he was here for the whole experience. And, there are many 20-somethings, I think, who would have, found their way to the opposite coast just to get away from it all. So I admire and love and adore the fact that he stepped into it and was present with us. Yeah. But when you're talking about the death talk, there was a particular event and everybody was home because it was right around Christmas time. So December, and Charles died in April. So, not a lot of time left. But he had said he wanted us all to have a family conversation. So after breakfast on Sunday morning, we had the death talk. So now I call that the death breakfast too. But seriously, I mean, we sat in the living room. So it was Charles, me, his sons, one of the grandchildren. So everybody was there. And he just opened up the conversation by saying, we all know I'm dying. I hope it's not imminent. but this, I want you to know what's important to me, what I want to happen, what I don't want to happen, and just went through it. And I mean, there was a fair amount of intensity, tension, intensity in the room. And then I remember Connor saying, you know, Dad, we could just taxidermy you and you could stay in that chair forever. Which the fact that we could sit there with the man who was dying and have that joke, I mean, that speaks volumes to the just the level at which I guess it's the honesty and the opency and the transparency with what was happening. And the beauty of that, and then he was very clear of what he did and didn't want and how and all those things. And didn't want to be maintained on machines, and the clarity with which he did that. Fast forward 4 months later, in the end stages of his dying, we never had to have another conversation amongst us about what we would or wouldn't do. I mean, it was clear. He had been so clear in all that. I mean, the burden that it removed from any of us was an enormous gift. We could then just experience it with him. We knew what was and wasn't going to happen. I mean, you don't know how, but we knew he wasn't going back to the hospital. We knew, what he did and didn't want. Yeah.
What a gift.
It was a huge, that is. And that was Charles the teacher. I mean, to sit there with your family, your children, your grandchildren, and to be able to talk about the fact that you're dying. I mean, I hope I'll be able to do it. I'm not sure, but that's a brave move.
That's such a gift, such a brave move, and I think that is where Charles is that teacher. And what I love is that ripple effect, as you shared. Hopefully, you'll be able to do the same. But regardless, for sure, you and Connor and your stepsons, I'm sure that there's going to be things that you will each do different. And I just love that. I really connect into that legacy of the fact, just these little things that we never think is going to be our. I think that actually, though, the little things like this, of where we can teach others, is much more profound than so much of the success and things in our world that gets lauded.
I have to think that none of them, and even my granddaughter, who was part of it, and she was still, I mean, she wasn't a little kid, but early teenager. I don't think any of them will ever be as afraid of talking about death going forward because of that experience. I mean, I hope not. It wasn't as horrible or as hard as they might have thought. It's not to say it was easy, but there's a way in which the difficulty of it is the fact of it. It's not the, oh my gosh, I'm afraid I'm going to upset Granddad if I talk about him dying. No, it's okay.
Yeah, I love that. As you shared earlier, it's that Charles created that container. It's okay, we can speak about it. Yeah. Let's talk about it, and then at the right time, crack a joke.
Right.
Yeah. It's beautiful. I think that just shows that the power of those death talks. And you also write a lot about the compartmentalization that was conditioned into you in your medical training. And I would love to come into this, because you spoke about how that was a real challenge when it came to staying present when Charles was sick, staying present sort of, I suppose, with the pain and the fear that came up. And I'd love to root into this, because the way that you weave mindfulness into your writing, and obviously everything that you do, I think is really, really profound. And it really resonates with me, because my greatest gift was the promise that I made to my daughter which was, I'm going to be here fully present for you through your death and then stillbirth, no matter what, which ended up being her greatest gift to me. She was my little teacher of actually, you can hold this all. And it doesn't mean that I'm always fully present. In fact, a lot of the time I'm not. It's a lifelong journey, but that really showed me the depths that I can hold.
It's a lifelong journey. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, in medical training, the things that we deal with and have to do, I mean, compartmentalization is a great skill, because if I'm going to do something that is, you know, possibly painful or dealing with a really tough situation, you don't have time, I suppose, or space to be emotional about it. You just get on with it, right? I mean, there are things that have to be done, and that's a skill that we learn. I would argue perhaps too well. I mean, you know, I was in training a long time ago, so maybe things are different now, but I don't ever remember having support for the debrief or the processing of things, right? You just went on, right? You were a soldier. So that was a skill certainly that I, and I think all my colleagues, learned. And early on, when Charles was sick, I would catch myself sometimes. I could be in that ICU beside him and feel nothing, because I was just in physician mode. I was looking at the monitor, the numbers, the medicines, just going through the motions, right? And I thought, this, you know, this doesn't feel right. And that's one of the things I worked with Dave, my therapist, on a lot. It's like, you know, how do I, and it came back to integrating those two pieces of me and learning to be present, to sit there with just the raw pain of, yeah, this is Charles in that bed. That's Charles's heart I'm watching on the monitor, not, you know. And that's not to say that you don't have emotions and caring when you're caring for other people. I don't want to make it sound that cold, but it is quite different.
Yeah.
So I had to learn that, and I practice mindfulness a lot, and that certainly brings you into the present moment. I mean, there's nothing else I know that can do it like that.
Yeah.
And otherwise, I mean, honestly, you miss all the good stuff, right? I mean, the beauty of the painful process I would have missed if I'd stayed in compartmentalization mode the whole time.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you there. And that's part of my mission through this as well, is very much to inspire us to just try and be, not to say we all should be present, because obviously the body is got moments where it's natural that it goes into shock and stuff like that. But at the same time, if we are able to cultivate mindfulness that can bring us back into presence, or to create greater presence as we're moving through, my experience has definitely been that actually the most painful of experiences do have, I'm quoting Rob Delaney from his book A Heart That Works, and he talks of the rainbow that he experienced in the death of his son, and actually that there were, mixed in with obviously the most raw searing pain, there were moments of curious joy, or a bit like Connor cracking that joke, those moments where suddenly you'll burst into laughter about something, or things will feel a bit normal, or you'll just get flooded with love. And I really do wonder how much as a society so many of us do numb ourselves out in that avoidance, but then in doing so, to your point, miss the real gifts that are here in this human experience.
Yeah, because that's what it is, right? It's the human experience, and the loss is as profound as it is because the love was as profound as it was. And, you know, that's what I come back to sometimes when I, you know, 14 years in and still get the tsunami of grief that'll come sometimes, not as often as it used to, but, you know, there's no stopping it, nor would I want to. Because even that, I mean, yeah, it's just, it's part of it, right?
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Because as well, I think we live in a society where you should be over it by now, as if grief's got an end date to it, which it really, really
Yeah, it's not
doesn't.
something to get over. It is one of my pet peeves. You know, you live with it; it lives with you the rest of your life, right? It's not. It's not as sharp over time. After Charles died, a cousin of his reached out to me, and she had lost a child. Which, I mean, those of you who have, I can't imagine the level of that grief. A spouse was bad enough, but she said to me that it never will go away. But what she had noticed is that as time goes on, it very slowly will occupy a little bit less of your time. And I remember reading that, like the week after Charles died, and thought, yeah, you're full of you know what. But she's right. I mean, it's not, the intensity wanes a little bit,
Hmm.
but it's not something I want to be over.
Yeah.
Nor could I be, I don't think. But Charles is very much still a part of my life.
Mm.
Not my body, but
I love that. It's not something you want to get over, nor should you have to.
yeah.
And for me, that really, I actually had a similar but different experience. So I had one of my clients, David. He was one of my first clients that I saw, coaching clients, when I returned to work, and he was the first person who said, "This is he said, I'm so sorry. What you've been through is a grief that will be with you for the rest of your life." But it's funny because if I think about it, I could have had a reaction, be like, "Oh, go away, I don't want to think about that." But actually, I felt really validated. I was like, in a world where everybody's telling me it's going to be okay, you're going to move on, it was that person who said, you don't have to, and you don't have to forget about her. She's always going to be a part of you. And he really ignited within me that understanding that actually this is something. I would say it's my tattoo of, I don't have any tattoos, but my one tattoo, which isn't a real tattoo, but it's that feeling here. And it's my tattoo of grief that's just right over my heart. I will always, at any point in the day, I can connect in and be like, oh, yep, I can feel that little purr of that tattoo of grief. And it's sort of integrated. And I've realized that where we fear sadness, because I think a lot of people, if I say that to them, I mean, a lot of the times they just back off from the conversation and disappear.
Yeah.
But actually, for me, it's like, no, it's just a part of me. I've integrated, it's part of my story. So that's totally fine.
You are, yeah. And that's what I was going to say is I think this notion of, well, you'll get over it, you'll move on, it'll be fine. It's their fear and not knowing how to address it.
Yes.
Thinking they don't want to bring it up, or people don't want to mention Charles to me because they think it'll upset me.
Yes.
It's like, no, I want to talk about him all day, every day. You might get tired of hearing about him. But it goes back to, I think if we were familiar with death, that talking about grief wouldn't be so hard for people. They just don't know where to put it, or it's their discomfort. Like you said, they want to back off and just leave the room.
Yeah.
Because they perceive that you're uncomfortable. I think it's, really their discomfort. But again, if we were emboldened to talk about death in our culture, grief would have to be part of that conversation. I always say back in the old days, whatever they were, people walked around with those black armbands on for a year, and you knew that somebody who was wearing that was in the process of grief, and just kind of give them some space, but it wasn't something to avoid and pretend you were done with because your 48 hours of bereavement leave is over.
Yes. Yeah, agreed. Totally agree. And I call myself out on that from all of my corporate career because I hadn't lost anyone significant. Lost like they've lost them in the supermarket. We were talking about this the other day, weren't we? Like I've lost them. I hadn't had anyone in my life. I'm constantly correcting myself on that because it's really deeply ingrained, but I haven't had anyone die in my life who was significant. And I call myself out on the fact that it was, if someone went off on bereavement leave, just when they came back, it was like, let's let's not talk about it. Let's not ask them. Let's not say the name of the person who's died in their life. And I think that is the most profound thing that we can do, even if they're tears. In fact, especially if they're tears, those are tears that need to be expressed. So why don't we allow someone that channel to be able to express themselves fully?
Why can't we hold container for somebody else to have some sadness, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly that.
Yeah. So we need to talk about it. I'm so happy that you're doing this podcast. It's fabulous. And we just need to have it part of the normal conversation.
Yeah, it's so
People
true.
talk about taxes more than they talk about death. And they don't like that.
Yes. It's so true. Yeah. And we also avoid our taxes. In the chart of what's the chart topper for avoidance, is death over taxes. And that, it's considering, as you shared earlier, 100% of us will go through this. That is a fact. It just seems, it boggles my mind. And for me, that's where I think there's such power. So I'm so grateful to you for writing your book and for sharing Charles's story and all of those lessons, because actually the more that we can share these stories, the more that we can learn from those wonderful teachers like Charles, that just helps us. And that's not to say it's going to, again, to your point, it's not to say all these conversations suddenly become easy and not difficult and not painful, but it shows us we can do it. Here's a path that someone's walked. And actually, these are things that is proven through human experience that we absolutely can do. And not only that, but it's also going to enrich our life on the other side if we do it. So, Martha, conscious of time, we are nearly complete in our time together. Although, honestly, I was telling you earlier, for anyone who's watching the video thing, you can see just how many little bookmarks I've got in your book from all of those lessons. So I feel like at some point there's going to have to be a part 2 for our conversation, because also where we didn't go as well as into the spiritual and mystical side, which is also very much woven into your storytelling. So would love to have that conversation with you. But before we do our part 2, I have one final question for you. And that is one that I ask of every single guest. And it's, from where you're sitting now, if you could write a note to any past version of yourself at any point in your life, what words of wisdom would you share with that past version of yourself from where you are now?
I would tell myself to trust myself and to trust my knowing.
I love that. I love that. And that's so beautifully aligned as well. And you speak a lot about your intuition in your writing and just building that trust.
Yeah. Yeah. Believing it, trusting it. Absolutely.
Yeah, because it's one thing hearing it, isn't it? And it's another thing. I really believe it.
Exactly. Yeah.
I feel it. Beautiful. Yeah. Amazing, Martha. Well, before we complete, I'd love for you to share as well, just where can people find your book? I will also put the links in the show notes, but just share anything else that you wish to.
So my website has a link to the book, and I think you're going to post that, right?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. That's easy. It's also available on Amazon, and it was at some point at Barnes & Noble. I don't know if they still have it available or not.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
But Tanya's going to put the link to the website. So this is the book.
Yes, A Death Lived. It's a really, really wonderful, wonderful read. And I would say it's one that is packed with lessons, whether it's something that is directly related to that which you're navigating yourself, or, to be honest, for me, I just absorb the memoirs about death, about grief, about all of this, because I do think that there's not been enough of these stories in my lifetime. So I'd say for anyone, just if you're curious, pick up a copy, because it's really, really inspiring.
Thank you.
Amazing. Well, Martha, thank you so much for joining me today on Death on the Daily. I've taken so much from all of your wisdom, and I'm so, so grateful to you and for everything that you do.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me, Tanya. Appreciate it. And look forward to part 2.
All of my gratitude to you for joining me for another Dead Conversation. Death on the Daily is edited by David Strutt.
The music is Set Free by Katie Gray. And I am Tanya Wilkinson. And if you enjoyed this episode, I would be over the moon if you can rate, review, and subscribe. It really, really helps me to get the word out there. And if you want to say hi or to hear more about my work as a coach and death doula, including how I support my clients to navigate their death on the daily, then all of the ways that you can connect with me are in the show notes. I'll be back soon with some more dead conversations. And in the meantime, take good care of yourself and others.
There's a cold fire, there's a crossfire, and there's something inside. And we'll never make it, and we'll never break it.